Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Hercule Poirot and a crime with too many confessions, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The Night the Truth Died. Thunder cracked across the sky like a scream torn from the heavens. A bolt of lightning illuminated the sprawling grounds of Highmoor Estate for the briefest second, just enough to reveal the silhouette of a man standing at the highest window of the manor, motionless, staring into the storm, as if it whispered secrets only he could hear. Then came the scream. A woman's scream, sharp, blood-curdling, and then silence. The great hall was plunged into chaos. A maid dropped a silver tray, porcelain shattering into ghostly fragments on the marble floor. Colonel March, red-faced and breathless, bounded down the stairs. "Someone fetch a doctor, and by God, lock the doors, no one leaves this house." Upstairs, in the west wing, a door stood ajar. Inside, the body of Lord Alistair Winthrop, slumped over his writing desk, a fountain pen clutched in one hand, the other dangling lifelessly at his side. Blood dripped slowly onto the Turkish rug beneath him, seeping into the pattern like a secret trying to escape. I, Hercule Poirot, arrived precisely 27 minutes after the alarm had been raised. Not a moment sooner, not a second late. The roads had been soaked in rain and riddled with fallen branches, but I am a man who does not permit mere weather to delay justice. "Mon Dieu," I whispered, stepping into the study, my patent, leather shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. It is always so, the storm outside and the greater storm within. The room was impeccably tidy. A single desk lamp cast a warm golden glow across Lord Winthrop's still face, frozen in an expression that one might mistake for peace. If one were not Poirot, no sign of a struggle, no open windows, and the door, locked from the inside. "Locked room," I said aloud, almost to myself. Always the favorite of those who wish to confuse. But the truth, it does not respect bolts and keys. Detective Inspector Kavanagh, a man of square shoulders and limited imagination, was already present, chewing on the stem of a pipe he did not light. "Shot in the chest," he muttered. "Point blank, no weapon found. Suicide's out of the question, but locked from the inside. Strange." "Strange?" I smiled softly, kneeling to examine the body. "No, mon ami. It is simply dramatic." I touched the inkwell, still damp. The pen, freshly used. A note had been written, but it was gone. Torn from the blotter, only a faint impression left behind. I angled the lamp. Cannot keep this secret any longer. A secret, of course. There is always a secret. "Tell me," I said, standing, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Who discovered the body?" "Miss Clara Winthrop," Kavanagh said. "His niece. Heard a noise, found the door locked. She fetched the butler to break it open." I nodded, my eyes narrowing. "Then let us speak with Mademoiselle Clara." Clara Winthrop was pale, trembling, her hands twisting the fabric of her shawl as if it were trying to betray her. "I heard a noise," she said, "like a thud. Uncle had been working late again, as he often did when anxious. And why was he anxious, mademoiselle? Her eyes flickered. The will. He had recently updated it. Some weren't pleased. Money, it always brings out the best lies and the worst truths. 3 others had been in the house at the time of death. The first, Colonel Percival March, retired military, once a friend of Lord Winthrop from their Oxford days, gruff, loud, too quick to offer condolences, too eager to shift suspicion. The second, Evelyn Carrow, Alistair's personal secretary, young, intelligent, and so composed, it became suspicious. He was under immense pressure, she told me. He spoke often of betrayal. He was afraid. Afraid of whom? I don't know, she said too quickly. And the third, Lawrence Winthrop, the younger brother, long estranged. Newly returned from South America, he claimed. He arrived 2 days prior, invited by Alistair himself. We had our differences, he admitted, but we made peace. Truly. Ah, I said, smiling thinly, but peace made in haste is often war in disguise. As I examined the crime scene once more, my eye caught something curious. A second wine glass on the desk, wiped clean, but imperfectly. A single fingerprint remained. Someone had shared a final drink with Lord Winthrop, a toast, or a prelude. And then the storm gave us a gift. The gardener, a man named Jonas, discovered a soaked scrap of paper near the hedge maze, torn, almost illegible, but not beyond saving. I dried it by the fireplace with tweezers and patience. It read, I fear Lawrence, but Evelyn knows too much. If something happens to me... It stopped there. Now the game turned. Lawrence, when confronted, scoffed. It's a forgery. My brother wouldn't fear me. We'd just reconciled. And yet, I said, he feared someone. And Mademoiselle Evelyn, she knows too much, n'est-ce pas? She paled. He confided in me. Yes, but I would never harm him. Kavanagh grunted. And the Colonel? Ah, yes, Colonel March, ever pacing, ever speaking. He owed me money, March admitted when pressed. But I didn't kill him. I was downstairs all evening, playing. Billiards with Jonas. Ask him? I did. Jonas confirmed it. Sort of. He was there, Jonas said, but he left for 10 minutes. Said he needed to take a call. I gathered them all in the drawing room. The fireplace crackled. Shadows danced. Tension thickened like fog. There are too many lies, I said quietly. And yet, only one truth. I turned to Clara. Mademoiselle, you said you heard a noise. And yet the study is on the west wing. Your room, on the east. You could not have heard it, unless you were already outside the door. She froze. She began. Non, do not speak, unless it is the truth. You were going to speak to your uncle. But why? To plead with him, not to change the will again? She trembled. I didn't kill him. I do not think you did. But you saw who did. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Then Evelyn rose. This is madness. You're turning on each other when the real killer is you, I said calmly. Evelyn stopped. The others stared. No, she whispered. No, you can't know that. But I do. The wine glass, the note, and most damning, your alibi. You said you were in your room, but the raincoat in your closet was still wet, and the soles of your shoes carried traces of ink spilled from Alistair's desk. You were there. You wiped the glass. You took the note. Her hands shook. He was going to ruin me, she breathed. He found out I'd been selling information. Business. Secrets. I begged him not to expose me, but he said he had no choice. I didn't mean to. Her voice broke. But you did, I said softly, and now the truth has returned. As Kavanaugh moved to arrest her, I turned to the window. The storm had passed. The moonlight bathed the grounds in silver, and yet inside, a heavier silence remained. Human nature, Hastings, I thought. It never changes. Pride, fear, love. These are the true weapons of murder. In the end, it was not greed or vengeance that killed Lord Winthrop. It was betrayal, and betrayal, mes amis, is always personal. As I left the estate, I heard the grandfather clock strike 3. Tick, tock, the hour the truth died, and yet from death, it rose again, just in time for justice. Chapter 2. Enter Poirot, the mind that never misses. The fire had long since gone out in the drawing-room of Highmore Estate, but the embers still whispered. A slow creak echoed through the ancient halls, as if the house itself shifted in discomfort. Somewhere, a clock ticked, slow, deliberate, like the pacing heartbeat of guilt. In the corridor outside the study, the butler, Mr. Hemsworth, stood pale as ash, gripping the frame of the door as though it held him upright. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. He's come. The camera would find him first in silhouette. Small, unassuming, precise. A bowler hat casting a long shadow beneath the chandelier, the polished shoes landing in soft, measured steps on the marble. Hercule Poirot. He said nothing as he entered. He did not have to. His eyes had already taken in the ornate rug at the entrance. Disheveled, unusual, a scuff mark by the baseboard. Mud, but only a partial shoe print, not from the storm. Outside, it was older, dried at the edges, missed by all. Not by Poirot. But the scene. It is never as it appears, is it? The truth, she wears disguises. Often the most innocent face masks the darkest motive. The detective walked through the manor like a surgeon among the dying. Clinical, calm, already diagnosing before the family had even spoken a word. They greeted him in hushed tones, like mourners afraid of what the body might reveal. Poirot simply inclined his head, gently, brushing past Evelyn Carrow as she clutched a velvet handkerchief, perfumed and barely damp from tears. "Madame," he murmured, eyes narrowing just for a moment as he noticed the indentation of a ring recently removed from her finger. A loss? Yes, but perhaps not of the man alone. The family gathered in the blue salon at the request of Poirot. He preferred it that way, eyes all around, expressions unguarded, lies harder to maintain under the pressure of observation. He did not speak for some time. Instead, he let the silence fester. It is a marvelous thing, silence. It unravels the nerves, encourages mistakes. Clara Winthrop was the first to crack under it. "It's all so sudden," she stammered. "Uncle was, well, he wasn't young, but he was healthy. This doesn't make sense." "And yet," Poirot replied softly, "you are certain it was murder. Curious. The doctor has not yet given his official cause of death. But you, mademoiselle, are certain?" Clara blanched. I meant only that I suppose everyone is assuming." "Indeed," Poirot said, folding his hands neatly in his lap, "and assumption is the first enemy of truth." Colonel March, standing stiff by the fireplace, gave a grunt. "We're wasting time. The killers, obviously someone from inside this house. No forced entry, door locked from within. That damn room, who could have gotten in or out?" Poirot turned to him slowly. Tell me, Colonel, you are a military man. Discipline, strategy. And yet you speak as though the locked door is the end of the story. Is it not rather the beginning? March's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Poirot's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer. The colonel's hands were calloused, but the nails were clipped short and neat, except the right index finger, which bore a faint red stain near the cuticle. Blood? Ink? Poirot made a note. Not with pen and paper, none. With the mind. Always the mind. He returned. To the study later that evening, long after the others had retired, the storm outside, a quiet hiss against the windows. He studied the desk again. A letter opener on the floor. Not dropped, but thrown, at a downward angle. The blotter showed a faint tear just at the edge. Someone had yanked the final note with haste. He measured the candle. It had melted unevenly. It had not been lit for long. Only 20 minutes, perhaps less, when Alastair died. From the fireplace, he retrieved another clue. Ash, yes, but mixed with it, a flicker of green wax. Not the household seal. Something private. A letter burned in a rush. Secrets discarded in flame. And still, the scent of lavender lingered in the air, too faint to be accidental. The next morning, Poirot began his inquiries in earnest. Evelyn Carrow was first. Miss Carrow, you were the late Lord Winthrop's secretary for how long? 3 years. And in that time, you became close? We were. Professional. Nothing more. Ah, but mademoiselle, Poirot said, leaning in, his voice almost affectionate, the eye does not lie so easily as the mouth. When you spoke of him last night, your voice trembled, but not with grief, with fear. She stiffened. You have no idea what you're implying. On the contrary, I imply nothing. I only observe. For example, your room. It smells of lavender, as did the study. Yet you claim not to have entered it for days. Is that not inconsistent? She did not answer. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch. Clara, on the other hand, gave him something unexpected. I think I saw someone that night, she said in a whisper. A shadow, near the staircase, around midnight. Why did you not say so sooner? I thought maybe I imagined it. I'd taken a sedative. But now, I don't know. Describe the shadow. Taller than average, broad shoulders, they moved quickly, silently. March, then, or Lawrence, both fit the frame. But March had claimed to be downstairs at that hour, with Jonas. And Jonas, he had vanished this morning, gone without a word. The staff claimed he had taken ill and gone home. Poirot frowned. Cowardice often arrives before guilt is proven. Later, in a brief encounter with Lawrence, Poirot offered him tea. Milk? Sugar? He asked. Neither, Lawrence replied. I prefer it strong, like the Argentinians make it. Ah, yes. You spent time in Argentina, no? And yet, you wear a London tailor's suit, recent stitching, and your boots, too clean for a man who's seen dust. Lawrence laughed. Are you accusing me of faking a continent, monsieur? Poirot's smile did not reach his eyes. Not yet. In the library, Poirot studied the will. 3 revisions in the past 2 years. The final version, unsigned, a draft, favoring Clara, but Evelyn in the previous version would have received a sizable share. Motive, yes, but not proof. Then came the twist, the red herring. A letter, addressed to Poirot himself, arrived the next morning. Unsigned, it read, You seek the wrong person. Evelyn is innocent. The truth lies in the past. Ask about Whitestone Hall. Ask the Colonel. Whitestone Hall. A scandal buried a decade ago. Financial fraud. A partner who vanished, records sealed. And Colonel March, formerly involved in a security contract there. When confronted, March bristled. That was years ago. Nothing to do with Alistair. But perhaps everything, Poirot said, because the missing partner in that scandal was Alistair himself. March's face froze. Poirot continued. He faked his death to escape prosecution. Resurfaced under his true name years later. Wealthy, respectable. But secrets, Colonel, they have a habit of becoming restless. March erupted. He blackmailed me. I paid him year after year to stay silent. But I didn't kill him. I wanted him exposed, not dead. Poirot turned. And yet the timing, it is too perfect. But it was not March. The final piece came not from evidence, but emotion. Clara, late that night, Poirot found her crying in the music room. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know it would go this far." He sat beside her. "You spoke of seeing a shadow, but it was not just a shadow, was it?" She nodded. "It was Evelyn. I saw her enter the study. She was holding something, a vial. I think poison." Poirot said nothing. His eyes closed gently. In the final confrontation, he gathered them all again. "I have made my conclusions," he said, voice quiet but firm. "There were many lies. A locked room, a missing note, a false trail to Colonel March. But in truth, the killer was closest to the heart." He turned to Clara. "You saw her, but you said nothing. Why?" Clara's voice broke. "Because I told her what Uncle was planning. I didn't mean for this to happen." Poirot looked to Evelyn. "You poisoned him. Slowly, not all at once. That night, you only ensured the final dose." Evelyn didn't deny it. "He was going to destroy me," she said. "I gave him everything. He promised he'd protect me. But in the end, he used me like everyone else." Poirot was silent for a long time. "There is no justice in poison," he finally said. "Only cowardice. But I understand the pain that breeds it." As she was taken away, Poirot stood alone by the fireplace, the flames dancing in his eyes. "We all wear masks," he murmured. "But the truth, mes amis, she sees through silk and steel alike." And the clock struck midnight. Tick, tock. The mind that never misses had found its mark. Chapter 3. 3 witnesses, 3 lies. "She was already dead when I entered the room," said the maid, her voice thin as frost. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper. Regret, guilt, or perhaps something far worse, deception. The body of Miss Edith Blake lay sprawled on the red velvet chaise in the conservatory, her eyes still open, lips parted mid-sentence, as if the final thought had been stolen from her throat. One shoe off, a wine glass overturned. The orange trees in the corner rustled in the draught from the broken window pane, a strange hush falling over the room, broken only by the slow, steady drip of rain from the glass above. "She screamed," whispered another voice, "Mr. Julian Carter, the estate's art curator." A single cry. I ran. I saw her fall. I saw the shape of someone. There, at the door. I swear it. Yet, curiously, no footprints marked the wet floor by the door he claimed to have seen someone vanish through. Not even a smudge, only dry, untouched stone. An illusion, perhaps, or a lie too quickly told. The third witness, Lady Fiona Darrow, recently widowed and striking in her pale silk, sat in her drawing chair, a cigarette barely lit between her fingers. "I was in the library," she said. "I heard glass shatter. I came in. She was gone already. Her neck looked—" She shuddered, exhaling smoke slowly. "No one deserves that. 3 witnesses, 3 different stories, all in the same house, all claiming to have arrived second, but someone had been first. Someone had watched her die. I, Hercule Poirot, stood quietly beside the fireplace, hands clasped neatly behind my back. The room still held her perfume, mixed now with the tang of blood and something more subtle, faintly metallic, unnatural. My eyes moved from the shattered window to the wine glass, to the clock on the wall. It had stopped, not at the time of death, but at 8:47 precisely. An accident? Or a message? Ah, but human nature, Hastings. It never changes. In the face of guilt, the memory becomes pliable. Details are sculpted, not remembered. Truth is bent to fit the conscience. They do not lie well, these people. Not to Poirot. Act 1 had ended in blood. Act 2 began in silence. The silence of 3 people carefully choosing every word, frightened not by the murder itself, but by what might be discovered beside it. Miss Edith Blake was not well liked. That was clear from the start. A sharp-tongued woman in her 50s, she knew far too many things about the people of Highmore Estate, their debts, their secrets, their betrayals. She'd been keeping a ledger, locked in her bedroom drawer, its contents encrypted in her peculiar shorthand. It took me little time to break it. Inside were names, numbers, hints of affairs, payments made in cash, slipped under doors. One entry stood out. J.C. threatened to expose me unless I stopped. Said he knew about the painting. Will he go to the police? Julian Carter, the art curator. But that was only the beginning. "Tell me, Monsieur Carter," I asked, in that voice that was polite but pointed. "You say you saw someone in the doorway. Describe them." "Tall," he said quickly. "Dark coat. Man, I think. But I can't be sure. It was so fast." "Yet you are sure they fled through the side door?" "Yes. Positive." "And yet," I said, tilting my head, "the floor was wet from the rain, mud from the garden, and not a trace of it on the tiles. How do you explain this?" His mouth opened, then closed. "Perhaps they stepped carefully?" "Indeed," I said, with a faint smile. "The killer, so careful as to hover above the floor." Lady Darrow interrupted. "It doesn't make sense. Why kill Edith? She was bitter, yes, but harmless." "Harmless," I said, walking to the chaise. "Yet she threatened you once, n'est-ce pas? Over your husband. She knew something." Her hand shook slightly as she raised the cigarette again. "That was years ago. But the past, madame, is like a shadow. It follows until the sun is gone." She did not respond. I examined the glass on the floor. Only one, but the wine decanter nearby was half empty. Edith had not been drinking alone. A second glass, wiped clean, lay beneath the chair, hidden but not lost. I held it up. "She had a guest," I said, before the scream. She trusted this guest. The maid, Anna, looked up suddenly, color draining from her cheeks. I don't know anything about that," she said. "Oh, but earlier you said she was alone. Now you say you don't know. A small inconsistency." Anna looked down. "I clean the conservatory in the mornings. That night, I heard voices." "Whose voices?" She hesitated. "I think Lady Darrow and Miss Edith." Lady Darrow stood. "That's ridiculous. I was in the library. I've said so. Then, madame, you will not mind if I inspect the books by your chair, I said. She stiffened. I retrieved a book, open and face down on the table. Its pages were dry, untouched. The bookmark had not moved in days. A single candle on the side table had burned down unevenly, just lit, recently. You were not reading, I said. You were with Edith. She sat slowly. She threatened me. She found out I'd been changing the charity records, diverting funds. My late husband left me nothing. Nothing. I needed to survive. But you did not kill her. She looked up. How do you know? Because you are frightened, but not guilty. The second twist came unexpectedly. Edith's cause of death had not been poison, nor a fall, nor the cut on her neck. It had been suffocation. A silk scarf pressed into her throat. No weapon was found, but the fibers, blue and embroidered, were unmistakable. Julian Carter owned one, wore it often. When confronted, he laughed nervously. So what? A scarf? That's not proof. None, I said, but the sketchbook in your room is. I laid it on the table. Inside, drawings of the stolen painting, the one he claimed not to know existed. Edith had been blackmailing him. The painting, a Renaissance piece lost in the archives, had never been stolen, merely hidden. Julian planned to sell it overseas. She knew, he muttered. She said she'd go to the police. I just wanted to scare her. You visited her that night. Yes. We argued. I left. But you returned. No. Then how do you explain the second wine glass, with your initials etched faintly into the base? He said nothing. I think, I said softly, you did not mean to kill her. But you did. He was silent for a long time. Then softly, she begged me not to take it, said she'd tell them all. I snapped. I didn't mean to. But I was not finished. Poirot never is, until the final truth steps from the shadows. I believe you, Monsieur Carter, but you are not the only one who entered that room. They looked at me, confused. I turned to Anna. You said you found the body, but you knew where the scarf was. You tried to hide it. She gasped. No. You saw him kill her, or thought he had, but she was still alive. You panicked. You smothered her, not out of hate, out of fear. You believed you were finishing what he started. You believed you were saving him. I love him, she whispered. Yes, I said, and so you murdered for him? Silence. Then wept confessions. Julian, for the theft. Lady Darrow, for the fraud. Anna, for the final breath. 3 witnesses, 3 lies, and yet, in the end, only one truth. As the constables led them away, I stared at the broken window, now boarded up. So many see only what they want. Each saw Edith in their own way, a threat, a tool, a burden. None saw the woman. That, I think, was her final tragedy, and perhaps their greatest crime. Even the clearest glass, I murmured, can shatter under pressure. And in the silence that followed, I heard no denials, only the slow, steady ticking of the truth returning. Chapter 4. The alibi that came too easily. The candle in the hallway guttered violently as the front door creaked open. A gust of wind swept through the manor, scattering papers in the vestibule and slamming the study door shut with a heavy, echoing thud. The silence that followed was deafening, too complete, too still. It was the kind of silence that only follows a scream or a lie. From the drawing room, a voice spoke, with chilling calm. I wasn't anywhere near the study. You can ask anyone. I never left the lounge. The fire hissed in the hearth. The room was warm, yet Poirot felt a distinct chill run down his spine, not from the weather, but from the ease with which the words had been spoken. Too precise, too ready, a perfect alibi, presented before any accusation had even been made. Ah, but human nature, Hastings. It reveals itself not through the loud protest, but through the smooth confession. The one who volunteers the truth unasked is often the one with the greatest reason to hide it. The body of Robert Langford lay face down on the polished floor of the study. A single bullet to the back of the head. No sign of struggle, no forced entry. The study door had been locked from the outside, not within. The key was found on the floor, next to the fallen inkwell, as though someone had tossed it back through the narrow letter slot after the deed was done. A message or mockery? There were 3 people in the manor at the time of the murder, excluding the servants who had been dismissed for the evening due to the violent storm. The generator had failed just before 10. The phone lines were down. It was, as Poirot mused later, a most perfect evening for imperfection to reveal itself. Suspect 1. Thomas Whitaker, the victim's business partner. A shrewd man with a reputation for quiet ruthlessness. He was the first to mention the lounge alibi. We were all there, in the lounge. Myself, Eleanor, and young Simon, playing bridge. I never left. Suspect 2. Eleanor Vale, Robert's cousin. Elegant, reserved, and known to be fiercely loyal, to a fault. He was like a brother to me, she had said, her voice tight with something between grief and calculation. We had our differences, yes, but I'd never harm him. Suspect 3. Simon Drake, Robert's ward. A quiet, bookish young man of 20, inherited into Robert's care after the death of his parents. I didn't even know he was in the study, Simon had said, barely above a whisper. I thought he'd gone to bed. Poirot had heard all of these stories before. Not in exact words, non, but in rhythm, in cadence. The rhythm of people rehearsing their roles in a play they'd not expected to perform so soon. And when they all claimed to be together at the time of the murder, it rang not as truth, but as collusion. Even in lies, the harmony was too neat, and yet no one could dispute the facts. The housekeeper confirmed that the 3 had indeed been in the lounge, at least before the lights went out. She had served them drinks at precisely 9:45. After that, she retired to the servants' quarters. When the gunshot came, just after 10, it was muffled by the thunder, and only Poirot, who had arrived mere moments later due to a prior invitation from Robert himself, had noticed something amiss, the scent of gunpowder still lingering like a ghost in the darkened corridor. In the study, Poirot moved slowly, carefully. The clock on the mantel had stopped at 10:04, impacted by the bullet perhaps. The ink had spilled across a set of papers. Contracts. One bore the initials T.W., another, unsigned, was marked Simon Drake, Power of Attorney. Curious, but more curious still was the coat on the back of the chair. Not Robert's usual wool. A lighter jacket, damp at the cuffs, and oddly familiar. He leaned closer. A torn seam on the right side, where a tailor's label had once been. Poirot made a note. Not with pen and paper, but with the mind. The next morning, in the pale light that spilled through the bay windows of the breakfast room, Poirot began his inquiries with Thomas Whitaker. "Tell me, monsieur," he said gently, "when exactly did you last see Monsieur Langford?" "Before dinner." Thomas replied. Around 8:30, we discussed the merger. He was hesitant. And after dinner, you remained in the lounge? Yes. The three of us. Bridge Poirot nodded. You are a man of logic, I think. Precise. And yet it seems to me you were ready with this story before the body was found. Why is that? Thomas's eyes narrowed. Are you accusing me of foreknowledge? I accuse no one, Poirot replied smoothly. I merely find it elegant. And as with architecture, an alibi that is too elegant must be examined for hidden supports. Poirot moved next to Eleanor Vale, who sat at the piano, playing a soft, mournful tune that faltered as he approached. Madame, he said, you are a pianist of skill. Music, it tells a truth, even when we cannot. She looked at him sharply. You think I'm lying? I think you are protecting someone. Perhaps the boy, Simon, or perhaps yourself. Her lips thinned. Robert and I had an argument earlier that evening, but I would never— Yet, Poirot interrupted, you mentioned a scotch, yes? Taken after dinner, and yet the decanter in the lounge remains full, untouched. Where did you get your drink? She faltered. I must have remembered wrong. Indeed, memory is a strange thing, especially when tailored to need. Finally, Simon. He sat in the library, a book open but unread, on his lap. Poirot watched him for a moment before speaking. You were to receive power of attorney. Simon blinked. I didn't know that. But the document was unsigned. Robert changed his mind. I suppose. Or perhaps someone else changed it for him. Simon's expression didn't change, but a pulse twitched at his temple. Poirot continued. There is a jacket in the study, monsieur. It is yours. I have seen it before. At the tailor's on Park Street. You had the seam torn last week, yes? Simon's voice was dry. I lost it days ago, and yet it appears in the room of the murdered man. That night, Poirot stood once more in the study, alone. The pieces lay scattered, like glass in a shattered window, each reflecting a part of the truth. But only one angle revealed the whole. Robert Langford had been preparing to change everything. The business, the will, even the custody of certain documents that Thomas Whitaker had desperately wanted destroyed. But Thomas had an alibi, a perfect one. And therein precisely lay the flaw. The killer had not entered the study. The killer had never left the lounge. Robert had been lured to his own death, summoned to the study by a note, a request, something urgent. And when he arrived, the killer remained in the lounge playing bridge. The shot, delivered through the study's side window, partially open to the rain, a silenced pistol. The glass shards found outside, not in. The entry point had not been the door, but the darkness. In the reveal, Poirot gathered them all. The perfect alibi, he said softly. It is a dangerous thing. It casts a shadow where there should be light. Monsieur Whitaker, you never left the lounge because you never needed to. You had prepared the room, positioned the window, and when you stepped to the fire to stoke it, as you claimed, you slipped the gun through the opening and pulled the trigger. Thomas paled. This is absurd. No, it is precise. The ink spilled, a distraction, the thrown key, a misdirection. But the jacket, Simon's jacket, used to confuse the timeline. Taken by you from the coat rack, worn to suggest Simon had entered the room earlier. A puppet string, a mask. Thomas said nothing. Eleanor gasped. You used us all. Poirot nodded slowly. The alibi was too smooth, monsieur. And as with any fine silk, the truth lies in the imperfections. Thomas was arrested, but Poirot's thoughts lingered, not on the killer, but on the victim. Robert Langford had tried to make amends, to right old wrongs, but in doing so, he had signed his own death. As the wind howled once more through the broken window, Poirot stood silently, watching the shadows move like guilt across the floor. "It is always the same," he whispered. "In the theatre of murder, the lie comes first, the bullet only after." And the clock struck once. Cold, final, tick-tock. Justice, at last, had no alibi. Chapter 5, Confession Number 1, The Housekeeper's Secret. The hallway was flooded with moonlight when the scream broke the silence, a sound so raw and jagged it seemed to splinter the very air. A thud followed, the dull weight of something collapsing to the floor. When Poirot turned the corner, he did not run. Running, as he often reminded Hastings, disturbed the scene. Instead, he walked with purpose, each step exact, precise, inevitable. On the floor outside the linen room knelt Mrs. Judith Maple, the housekeeper of Highmore Estate for over 20 years, her starched apron stained with something dark. Her hands were raised, trembling in the air as if reaching for something long vanished. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, and wet with tears. "I did it," she whispered, breathless. "I killed him." The words hung in the corridor like thick smoke. Too easy, too rehearsed, and above all, too soon. Poirot tilted his head slightly. "Madame," he said, voice as soft as it was dangerous, "let us not disturb the truth before she has spoken, eh? Human nature, Hastings. It crumbles not under the weight of guilt, but the burden of grief. And this woman, this housekeeper, with her years of silent observation and discipline, was unraveling far too fast. Something in the confession did not sit right. It was not the words, it was the tone. It was not guilt that broke her voice. It was something else, something deeper, something older. The body she spoke of was not the one from the study the night before, but another discovery. In the cellar, a second corpse, weeks old, unidentifiable at first glance, wrapped in a curtain from the East Wing drawing room, a single shot to the chest, buried deep behind racks of vintage wine. "A vagrant," she said through tears. "He broke in. I found him. I panicked. I didn't know what to do." Poirot stood in silence, watching the flickering lantern light cast shadows across her face. Lies, like dust, cling differently to different people. On some, they look like fear. On others, guilt. But on Judith Maple, they looked like duty. 3 suspects had remained under the estate's roof in the days since the murder of Robert Langford. All had their reasons to stay. All had woven their stories into a neat fabric of alibis and deflections. Now, with a second body found, that fabric began to fray. Thomas Whitaker, arrested but recently released due to lack of evidence, had not gone far. He remained in the guest house on the grounds under police surveillance. He claimed to have nothing to do with the second body. "Why would I hide another corpse?" he asked Poirot, with the arrogance of a man who believed his first alibi had nearly worked. "What would that gain me?" Poirot merely nodded. "Indeed, monsieur, it is very inefficient murder. To do it twice would be messy." Eleanor Vale, still pale and aloof, had grown quieter by the day. She watched Poirot with the fear of a woman who knew she was being watched in return. He observed her carefully. Her gloves were new, her shoes recently polished, but the scent of camphor on her cuffs spoke of old garments, retrieved perhaps from storage, perhaps to cover blood or guilt. And then there was Simon Drake. The boy had said little since the discovery, but Poirot noticed the way his hands shook when he poured tea, the way he glanced toward the cellar door when no one was speaking. He carried a fear not of what had been found, but of who it might be. 3 suspects, 3 stories, but now a 4th had entered the stage. Judith Maple, the housekeeper, the one who saw everything, heard everything, knew where every key lived, where every rug was rolled, which light flickered, and which secrets whispered behind closed doors. Her confession could have ended the matter. It should have. But Poirot's mind did not rest so easily. He began, as always, with observation. The body in the cellar was male, mid-30s, well-dressed, though the clothes were torn, no ID, no jewelry, but on the wrist, a faint tan line where a watch had been. The wrist itself had been broken, deliberately, a crude attempt to obscure time of death or to erase identity. The curtain was more telling. East wing, an unused room, a sitting chamber closed since the renovations began. Judith had access to it, but so did the others. Poirot stood alone in the east wing for over an hour. Dust floated in beams of silver light. He examined the curtain rod. One panel missing, but not torn, cut cleanly, with shears, not scissors, from the linen cupboard. Later he sat with Judith Maple in the small parlor she used as an office. The fire crackled between them. He offered her tea. She refused. "You are frightened, madame," he said softly, "but not of prison. No, you are frightened of a truth you did not intend to reveal." Her eyes filled again. "He came at night," she whispered. "He broke in, said he knew someone in the house, demanded money. I didn't know what to do." "You shot him?" "Yes." "Where did you get the gun?" Silence. Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You see, madame, that is the difficulty. The weapon used in the cellar murder. It is not yours. It is a military revolver, one that was reported missing by Thomas Whitaker last year." She looked up, sharply. "I didn't know." "Non," Poirot said gently. "You did not know, because you did not fire it." Her hands trembled. "I found blood in the wine rack," he continued, "older than the body. You moved him later, after he was dead. Why?" She broke. "I was protecting him," she said. "My son." And there, mes amis, was the first twist. Judith Maple had once had a child, a son, born in secret when she was young. Given away, she had never spoken of him. Until now. "He came to me weeks ago, desperate, said he was being hunted. I let him stay in the cellar, just for the night, but then I heard the shot. When I found him, he was already gone." She had hidden the body, buried her grief under years of practiced silence. But her son had not died from robbery or chance. He had been executed. Poirot now knew the second murder had come first, and the murder of Robert Langford had been a desperate attempt to bury it. But by whom? The answer came not from a clue, but from a hesitation. Simon Drake. In the study, Poirot confronted him gently. "You knew the man in the cellar." Simon froze. "No." "Yes, because he was your father." Silence. "My mother never spoke of him," Simon whispered. "She said he left, but he wrote me, years later, said he'd come back for me, that he had money, that he'd met someone at Highmore who could help him get it." "Robert Langford." Simon nodded. "He came here." "To blackmail him, but Robert refused. They argued. I heard it, but I was afraid. I didn't want him to leave again, so I followed him. I saw Thomas. And there was the second twist. Thomas Whitaker had fired the gun. But the motive was hidden beneath layers of old betrayal. The man in the cellar had not come to rob. He had come to reclaim something owed to him. Money stolen from a failed business venture years ago. Thomas had framed him, forced him into hiding. And now he had come back for justice. So Thomas silenced him. Judith found the body. Simon said nothing. Robert tried to intervene. And for that, he too was silenced. In the final act, Poirot gathered them all. The firelight danced across their faces. Shadows lengthened. The truth, at last, had taken shape. "Judith," he said, "you did not kill your son. You buried him, yes, out of fear, but not guilt. Simon, you saw it all, but said nothing. A child's silence. I understand. But the killer," he turned to Thomas, "is you." Thomas rose, defiant. "You have no proof." "I have a glove," Poirot said, "buried with the body. Yours, with your initials, faded in the lining, and I have the tailor's receipt for a suit ordered and never collected, delivered here. To your name. He wore it when he died." Thomas faltered. "You knew he would come. You arranged it, to finish what you started years ago." The constables took him quietly. Later, alone with Judith, Poirot said only this: "You have suffered much, but know this, his secret is no longer a shame. It is a wound, and wounds, madame, may finally heal when the air of truth is allowed to touch them." She wept silently. And as Poirot left the estate that night, the sea winds howled across the cliffs, and the moonlight fell gently on the manor. The house had held many secrets. Now one of them had finally confessed. But the truth, mes amis, she is rarely what she seems. She speaks not in the cries of the broken, but in the spaces between their words. Chapter 6. Confession number 2. The lover's betrayal. It was not the blood that first caught her attention. It was the perfume. Heavy, cloying, floral, familiar, intimate. It lingered in the corridor like a ghost of something tender, now twisted into something far more cruel. A moment later came the soft sound of a sob behind the half-closed door of the morning room. Not the violent sobbing of guilt or despair, but something quieter, controlled. A sorrow rehearsed. Poirot paused. At the threshold, the morning light cutting sharp angles through the windows, glinting off the silver frame of a photograph. Two figures, smiling. Lord Alistair Winthrop and Miss Evelyn Carrow, his personal secretary, and, it was said in whispers, something more. And yet now she sat in that very room, that very light, head bowed and hands clasped tightly in her lap, whispering, "I loved him, and I killed him." The words, like the first confession from the housekeeper days earlier, fell too, perfectly. Not in their structure, but in their timing. Confession, Poirot had always observed, is a curious thing. It comes not always from guilt, but sometimes from desperation, sometimes from performance, sometimes from love that has rotted into something darker. He entered the room with the careful silence of a man who knew already that something was amiss. Evelyn did not look up. She spoke again, as if continuing a conversation that had long since begun in her own mind. "He was going to leave me. I saw it in his eyes. I knew it. The way he spoke to Clara. The way he paused before saying good night. That's how it always starts." Poirot said nothing. He let her words float, fill the room, wrap themselves in their own contradictions. I followed him, she continued. That night, after he wrote the letter, I knew he was planning something final. He said he was tired of secrets, of lies. He said he wanted to start again. Did he say this to you, mademoiselle? Poirot asked gently. No, she replied. To her, Clara, but I heard them through the wall. He nodded slowly. And that was the moment you decided to kill him. She blinked, the tears now dry on her cheeks. Yes, it was the neatness of it, the symmetry, that troubled Poirot. Love, in its rawest form, is rarely so composed. A lover scorned might kill, yes, but not with such elegance of motive. This, he thought, was a story, told for an audience. And like all good stories, it contained just enough truth to be believable. Evelyn Carrow had worked with Lord Winthrop for nearly 5 years. Intelligent, capable, loyal. More than loyal. Devoted. But beneath that devotion, Poirot sensed something else. A hunger. Not merely for affection or attention, but for control. She had been the keeper of his calendar, the curator of his communications, the silent filter between his world and everyone else. She did not love him, not truly. She possessed him, but now he was dead, and someone else had taken him. 3 suspects remained as the investigation deepened into its second week. Clara Winthrop, the niece, whose inheritance had suddenly doubled after a recent amendment to Alistair's will. Colonel March, the longtime friend with a quiet, mounting debt and a temper he struggled to hide. And Evelyn, the devoted companion, who had offered a confession, but one that did not match the forensic evidence. The bullet that killed Alistair had been fired from a gun at close range. Powder burns on the collar confirmed it. But Evelyn's story placed her at the doorway, watching, trembling, firing with eyes closed. An inconsistency Poirot could not ignore. In the days that followed, Poirot dissected Evelyn's story piece by piece. She claimed she had retrieved the weapon from the study drawer, a revolver Alistair had kept for security, rarely used, often misplaced. Yet, when Poirot examined the drawer, he found no sign of forced entry, no smudges or prints. The revolver had not been there. Someone had moved it beforehand. Someone with forethought. More curious still was the diary. Alistair's private journal, recovered from the safe in his bedroom, held a single entry from the night before his death. She knows. Evelyn, I saw the papers in her drawer. She thinks I don't notice, but I do. The money is missing. I confront her tomorrow. A betrayal, not of the heart, but of trust. Evelyn had been siphoning funds from the foundation, small amounts cleverly hidden in expense reports. She had expected him to be blind. He was not. When confronted with this, Evelyn broke down again. But this time, her confession changed. He threatened to ruin me, she whispered. He said he'd call the police, that he'd tell everyone what I did. I couldn't let that happen. And so you killed him? Yes. But Poirot, once again, shook his head. You see, mademoiselle, he said softly, your story is convincing. But it is too adaptable, too eager to bend to each new fact. Real guilt does not follow evidence. It is buried beneath it. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Then what are you saying? I am saying, Poirot replied, that you are not the killer. You may have betrayed him, yes, but the betrayal that killed Lord Winthrop, it was deeper than fraud. It was personal, intimate, hidden beneath the guise of something pure. And then he turned his gaze to Clara. She had played the grieving niece so well. Her tears came easily. Her voice never faltered. She had leaned on Evelyn, cried in her arms, pointed toward the colonel when doubt was cast her way. But Poirot had seen the way she looked at her uncle in the portraits, not with affection, with calculation. In a locked drawer in Clara's room, Poirot had found letters, dozens, from Alistair, all returned, unopened. She had severed contact with him for nearly 6 years, only returning to the estate after her father's death left her penniless. Her relationship with her uncle was not familial. It was transactional. One letter stood out, torn at the corner, stained with ink. If you refuse to return the brooch, Clara, I will be forced to involve the authorities. It was your mother's. She never intended it to leave the family. The brooch, a sapphire antique, had recently appeared in a local auction, sold anonymously. Poirot had traced the transaction back to Clara's bank account. She had forged a signature, pawned family heirlooms, lied about her father's estate. Alistair had found out, and unlike Evelyn's embezzlement, this was theft, a charge that would not go quietly. And so, on the night of his death, Clara had lured him to the study. She had taken the revolver from Evelyn's drawer, a drawer Poirot knew Evelyn left unlocked when she trusted someone. And then she had shot him. Close range. One bullet. No hesitation. The final twist, however, came not from Clara or Evelyn, but from the colonel. During a quiet walk through the West Garden, Poirot asked him simply, "What do you remember about that night?" "I heard the shot," March said. "From the drawing room. I ran in, found Evelyn screaming." "You were the first to arrive?" "Yes." "And yet the revolver was already gone." March hesitated. "I removed it," he confessed. Evelyn was shaking. "I didn't want the police to find her with it. I thought she'd done it." Poirot nodded. "You acted on instinct. Misplaced, perhaps, but not malicious. He had no reason to lie, no benefit from doing so. His action, though foolish, had protected the wrong person, and inadvertently buried the truth." In the final confrontation, Poirot gathered them all once more in the drawing room. "The truth, mes amis," he said, "is a fragile thing. It is buried beneath guilt, under performance, behind the softness of tears and the strength of lies." He turned to Evelyn. "You did not kill him, but you allowed yourself to believe you did, because it made sense of your guilt." To the colonel, "You protected her, because you saw what you wanted to see, a woman scorned and desperate." And then, to Clara, "But you, mademoiselle, you killed him not out of rage or love or fear. You killed him because he threatened the story you had written for yourself, a story in which you were the victim, always." Clara said nothing, but her silence was not denial, it was confirmation. As the constables took her away, Evelyn whispered, "I thought he loved me." Poirot replied, "Perhaps he did. But love, mademoiselle, is not what is said, it is what is done." The rain fell gently that night, washing the estate in silver shadows. The perfume still lingered in the morning room, but now it smelled of something else, regret. And Poirot, standing alone by the study window, whispered to himself, "Betrayal, Hastings. It cuts not at the throat, but at the soul." And so ended the second confession. But the truth, as always, had waited patiently to speak. Chapter 7. Confession number 3. The Brothers' Revenge. The storm was relentless. It hammered the windows with a fury that felt deliberate, as though nature itself had turned accusing. Inside the great hall of High Moor Estate, the fire had died to embers. Shadows sprawled long across the panelled walls, and the ticking of the grandfather clock seemed slower, heavier, a heartbeat that could not forget. And then, in the flickering light of a single candle, the voice came from behind Poirot. "I should have done it. God knows I wanted to." It was Lawrence Winthrop, standing at the edge of the drawing room, his coat soaked from the rain, collar turned up like a soldier who had long since deserted the battlefield. His face was drawn, not with guilt, but with something older, exhaustion maybe, or grief warped into hatred. "But you did not," Poirot replied calmly, without turning. A silence passed between them. Lawrence stepped forward, his boots echoing on the parquet. "I wanted him dead, Poirot. I won't lie. I wanted him to suffer for what he did to me, to our family." "Ah," Poirot murmured, "you speak of your brother." The bitterness was immediate. "He wasn't my brother. Not truly. Not after what he did." Poirot turned at last, his gaze steady, cool as glass. "And yet you returned to Highmore." "For my mother's things," Lawrence said flatly, "for closure." "But perhaps also," Poirot said gently, "for justice. Or vengeance. Though you, see, mon ami, they are not the same thing. Human nature, Hastings, it never changes. The mask of virtue so often hides the face of revenge. And Lawrence Winthrop, exiled for 2 decades, disgraced, forgotten, had now returned on the eve of a murder. Not coincidence, never coincidence, especially not when he arrived the same night Lord Alistair Winthrop was shot in his study. Shot once, precisely, in the heart. The estate had already borne the weight of 2 confessions, one from the housekeeper, another from the mistress, but both had unravelled beneath Poirot's eye. Now came a third, but this one, he suspected, was crafted not to deceive Poirot, but to deceive someone else. Perhaps even Lawrence himself. In the hours following Lawrence's declaration, Poirot set about his usual rituals: observation, interrogation, reflection. He studied Lawrence's coat. Drenched, yes, but not from the storm alone. A faint trace of ash at the collar, the scent of smoke. Not tobacco, something else. Wood smoke tinged with wax. Candle wax. Poirot found what he needed in the east corridor, beyond the music room. A broken sconce. The candle shattered, the brass holder bent, and a patch of scorched floor beneath it. It had been replaced hastily, but the timing was wrong, too convenient. Poirot bent down, running a gloved hand along the floor. Still warm, faintly. It had happened the night of the murder. The implication? Lawrence had been near. The study, close enough to see the candle fall. Close enough to be seen. Act I had been clear. Lord Alistair was found dead, locked in his study. No sign of forced entry. The murder weapon, a revolver registered in Alistair's name, was discovered beneath the floorboard, hidden in a vent only accessible by someone who knew the house well. Lawrence had grown up here. Act 2 brought whispers of motive. In the week since the death, Poirot had uncovered the truth of Alistair's early dealings, business betrayals, family debts, rewritten as crimes, and one name repeated in the letters: Lawrence. Cast out after a forged embezzlement claim, his reputation ruined, his life unmade. One letter from Alistair to the family solicitor stood out: Lawrence returns. I am unsure of his intentions. I write this not out of fear, but caution. I suspect he does not seek forgiveness. And then there were the journals. Alistair's final entries had shifted in tone. Less calculating, more confessional. Guilt, long buried, had begun to crack the surface. Poirot laid the journal open before Lawrence the next morning. Did you know, he asked, that your brother intended to reinstate your share of the estate? That he had begun drafting a letter to the board, clearing your name? Lawrence said nothing. He planned to sign it the day after he died. Still silence. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You knew, didn't you, that he was going to make it right? Lawrence's expression twisted, not with surprise, but pain. Yes, he finally said. He told me. That night, he called me to the study, said he was sorry for all of it. He looked me in the eye like a man finally prepared to stand trial for his sins. And you left him alive? Lawrence's voice cracked. Yes. A convenient answer. It's the truth. Perhaps, Poirot said, or perhaps it is the truth you've decided to believe, because the alternative is too monstrous. And then, the twist. Poirot found the missing piece not in the study, not in the bedrooms, but in the greenhouse, a scrap of cloth, caught on a rusted nail, stained, torn, and embedded with a fleck of wax. Beside it, a pair of garden shears. Recently used, recently cleaned, too clean. He followed the trail to the gardener's shed, and there, hidden beneath a tarp, was a coat, not Lawrence's, the Colonel's. Colonel March had denied ever entering the East Wing. But the coat told another story. Mud from the path, wax, blood, not Alistair's blood, older, dried, the second murder, the man in the cellar, and suddenly the red herring came into view. Colonel March had used Lawrence as a distraction. Knowing his return would draw suspicion, he used it to settle an old score. The man in the cellar, James Morley, a con man, once a friend, long presumed dead. But he had come back, threatening to expose March's wartime secrets, smuggling, extortion, the quiet execution of a whistleblower. March had killed him, then hidden the body. When Alistair discovered the truth, he had confronted March, and so March silenced him too. The revolver had been taken days earlier, the study staged, and Lawrence, already filled with doubt and rage, became the perfect suspect. Poirot gathered them all in the drawing room. The fire snapped and hissed. The storm had passed, but the air still hung thick with aftermath. I have heard many confessions, Poirot began, but none so sad as this one, for it is a confession of a man who did not commit murder, but still carries the weight of it in his soul. He turned to Lawrence. You did not kill your brother, but you believed you could have, that perhaps you should have. And so, when the moment came, you let yourself believe you did. To Evelyn, you betrayed him with money. To Clara, you betrayed him with lies. To Judith, you buried a son for fear of scandal, and then to March. But you, Colonel, you betrayed him with blood. March did not deny it. He merely exhaled. I told him to stay out of it. That old secrets deserved to stay buried. And so you buried him, Poirot said coldly. As March was led away, Lawrence asked softly, Then why did he write me that letter? Why forgive me, after everything? Poirot paused. Because, monsieur, he said, sometimes those closest to us are the easiest to punish, and the hardest to love. He turned to the window as dawn broke across the lawn. Justice, yes, but no victory. As he lit a fresh candle in the hall, Poirot whispered to himself, Vengeance is a flame, Hastings. It warms nothing. It only burns. And in the silence that followed, no one spoke again of the brothers' revenge, because in truth, it had never been his. Chapter 8. The Clue. No one noticed. The grandfather clock in the west corridor struck midnight with a chime so hollow it seemed to echo into the bones of the house. Somewhere above, in the attic rafters, something shifted. Perhaps a loose beam, perhaps something else. But downstairs, in the main hall of Highmoor Estate, Hercule Poirot stood absolutely still, staring at a painting. Not the subject, not the colors, but the frame. Tilted, ever so slightly, as though nudged by a breeze. No one remembered. It was such a small thing, a detail unnoticed by every guest, every servant, every investigator who had come before him. But for Poirot, it might as well have been a scream. "Mon ami," he murmured, though no one was present to hear. "It is always the same. People notice the loud voices, the locked doors, the blood, but it is the quiet things that tell the truth, the misplaced object, the missing button, the frame that tilts itself toward murder." The house had grown colder since the death of Lord Alistair Winthrop. Not by temperature, but by atmosphere. The air was thick now, heavy. Each corridor whispered differently, like an old man catching his breath between secrets. The investigation had twisted like ivy around the columns of the estate. So many motives, so many lies. But now, something new had been found. Or rather, something old, long overlooked, had been seen. It began again, as so many of these things do, not with discovery, but with absence. The missing letter, the final page of Alistair's will. Everyone had assumed it had been destroyed. By Evelyn, by Clara, by someone with a reason to see it vanish. But Poirot, ever precise, ever obsessive in his attention, asked the question others ignored. If a letter is burned, where is the ash? And so he searched, not for ink nor paper, but for silence, quiet places where no one had thought to look. Behind the bookshelf, in the study, under the piano, in the music room. And at last, behind the painting in the hallway, a cavity, no more than an inch deep. But inside, a single envelope, sealed with wax, untouched. It was the missing page. But before Poirot could reveal it, he wanted one more thing. He wanted to be certain who had known it was missing and who had pretended not to. Act 1, the crime and chaos, had long since passed, but its echoes remained. Lord Alistair's murder, the second body in the cellar, the collapsing web of deceit that spread from Evelyn's betrayal to Lawrence's haunted return. The estate was unraveling, and yet one name remained strangely untouched, one presence curiously quiet. Helen Ashcroft, the nurse. She had been brought in 3 months prior, supposedly to care for Alistair during his bouts of vertigo and memory loss. A refined woman, quiet, competent, almost too competent. While others had confessed, argued, wept, Helen had observed a ghost in pressed linen. It was Poirot's observation of her that sparked the thought. She never left her gloves behind, never set down her handbag. Her uniform was always perfectly pressed, even during the chaos of the investigation. She knew how to remain invisible, and those who master invisibility are often those with the most to hide. "I trust you are well, mademoiselle," Poirot said to her over tea. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. As well as one can be, under the circumstances." "Indeed," he replied. "The death of Lord Alistair, it must have been very troubling. You knew him well." Her eyes flickered. The smallest pause. "I was only his nurse." "Ah, but nurses know more than most. The health of the body, yes, but also the state of the mind." She smiled, but said nothing. It was the third suspect Poirot had met that day. The others included Edwin Rowley, the estate's solicitor, nervous, precise, always appearing with answers just before the question. And Georgina Vale, a distant cousin, returned from Vienna under the guise of grief, but more accurately drawn by the scent of inheritance. Edwin, for his part, had claimed the final will was incomplete. Alistair mentioned changes, he'd told Poirot, but I never saw them signed. And yet, Poirot said, you attended to his affairs weekly, did you not? I did. And he trusted you? I believe so. Then why did he consult a notary in Bath 2 weeks before his death? A notary you do not know. That silenced him. Georgina was less subtle. I came to say goodbye, she said sweetly. Alistair and I were never close, but family is family. We, Poirot replied, nodding. And yet you arrived before news of his illness was public. She smiled thinly. I had a feeling. Or a phone call, Poirot said. In each conversation, a new thread appeared. Poirot collected them patiently, as one might gather feathers from the wind. The final piece, however, came from something said days before, by Evelyn, in her first confession. A single phrase, he wrote her a letter. I saw him seal it. He said she needed to know the truth. Poirot had assumed she meant Clara, or even Judith, but now he knew. He had been wrong. The letter was to Helen. It was time for Act 3. Poirot called them all into the great salon. The fire roared in the hearth, casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, the rain came again, as always, like a reckoning. He began, not with accusation, but with admiration. The murderer, he said softly, was clever, resourceful, even elegant in their execution. They did not rush. They planned. They made others lie for them without knowing they were doing so. A master of misdirection. A ghost in the machine. He turned slowly to Helen. You, madame. A silence, thick and still. You were not merely a nurse. You were his confidant. And more than that, his daughter. Gasps. Faces turned. Helen stood frozen, pale. It is true, is it not? Poirot said. He fathered you in secret. Long ago, you came here not for employment, but for recognition. Her voice broke. He denied me. Non, Poirot said gently. He did not. He wrote the will to name you, to give you your share. But someone discovered this. Someone who could not allow it. And they came to you, whispered lies, said he would never acknowledge you, that he mocked you, that you were nothing. He turned to Edwin Rowley. You told her that, did you not? Rowley's eyes widened. That's absurd, Poirot continued. You stood to lose everything. If Helen was legitimized, her share would come from yours. You had debts, you had secrets, and so you poisoned her heart against him. Poirot looked back to Helen. You believed him cruel. So when the moment came, you let him die. You didn't fire the gun, but you left the door unlocked. You left the revolver on the table, and you vanished from the corridor. She sank slowly to the floor. He was my father, she whispered. He called me a mistake. Poirot knelt beside her. No, he said softly. That is what you were made to believe. But the truth was buried, like the will, in plain sight. And so it ended. Helen, broken not by malice, but by manipulation. Edwin arrested, Georgina sent away, and the final letter, delivered to Poirot's hand by the housekeeper that evening, confirmed it all. A note from Alistair. She deserves everything. If I die before it is done, let it be known. She is my blood. I failed her once. I will not fail again. Poirot folded the letter, slowly, delicately, Human nature, Hastings. It lies not in what people say, but in what they overlook. And as he stood beneath the ticking clock, the firelight catching the gold trim of his sleeve, Poirot whispered aloud, "It is always there, the clue. We pass it 100 times. We dismiss it. We laugh at it. We forget. Until, at last, it refuses to be unseen." And the rain kept falling. But the truth, at last, had come into the light. Chapter 9. Red herring, red hands. The scream did not come from the cellar, nor the study, nor the narrow servant's staircase, where secrets often whispered their way upward in the dark. It came from the ballroom, a place of music, of elegance, of distant memories, now tainted with horror. The crystal chandelier trembled as if it, too, recoiled in disgust. A wineglass shattered on the marble floor beneath a limp hand. And in the golden glow of the gas lamps, the red was not from Merlot. It was thicker, slower, still warm. "I found him like this," gasped Miss Georgina Vale, her breath a flutter of lace and perfume. Her eyes were wide with innocence, but her hands were shaking, and one gloved finger bore a faint smear of crimson. Poirot stepped forward without haste, his patent leather shoes tapping gently across the floor like a metronome counting down to truth. He did not look at the body, at least not yet. He looked first at the room. The glass, the spacing of the chairs, the untouched plate of hors d'oeuvres on the side table, a cigar still smoking in an ashtray. The little things. "A man does not finish a cigar mid-draw," Poirot said softly. "Unless the conversation has ended quite abruptly, n'est-ce pas?" Inspector Levington, who had arrived only minutes before, blinked at the body of Arthur Gresham, the estate's financial advisor, crumpled in the corner beneath the curtain rods, his eyes frozen wide in a mixture of surprise and something close to terror. "Who had reason to kill Gresham?" the inspector muttered. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah, mon ami, a better question. Who did not?" The ballroom had been reopened that very night for a charity auction, a last-minute addition to Alistair Winthrop's will meant to disperse several of his prized possessions for causes unknown. Guests gathered, not just for philanthropy, but for spectacle. Beneath the chandeliers, wine had flowed, laughter echoed, and in every polite smile there had lurked an unspoken question. Who benefits now? Among them, Evelyn Carrow, finally unburdened by suspicion, Clara Winthrop, poised with the composure of one who knows the spotlight favors her side, Colonel March, silent, watching, and Helen Ashcroft, seated near the fireplace, knitting with delicate purpose. And of course, Georgina, bright, warm, radiant in silk, standing once again where everyone could see her. The victim had been well known, well dressed, and well hated. Act 1, the crime and chaos, had begun without warning. And as Poirot moved to examine the body, he noted first the necktie, loosened, the shirt cuff, torn, a struggle, and something more. Beneath the body, smeared across the parquet, a single playing card. The Queen of Hearts. Poirot picked it up delicately. "Love," he said aloud, "or betrayal in disguise." There were no fingerprints, but that mattered little. The card had not been meant to identify the killer. It was meant to mislead, the red herring, and it had worked. By midnight, the stories began to surface. Evelyn had argued with Gresham earlier that week over a disputed accounting of the Foundation's funds. Clara claimed she'd seen him with the revised will, hours before it had vanished again. Colonel March, still under investigation for past crimes, had received a cryptic telegram. "He knows." And Georgina, Well, Georgina had been seen dancing with him only half an hour before the scream. Act 2, clues, red herrings and suspicions, was in motion. The first twist came swiftly. Poirot, while examining the wine glass nearest the body, found lipstick. Not unusual, except the color was not worn by Georgina. It matched Helen Ashcroft's. He questioned her gently. "I spoke with Arthur earlier," she admitted. "He asked about a missing brooch. Something Alistair left behind. I told him I didn't know." "You kissed the glass?" She blushed. "No, I left it behind. I was startled." He was agitated. Poirot nodded, but did not believe her. Later, alone in the library, Poirot replayed the evening in his mind. The card, the glass, the suddenness of the scream. It was too theatrical, too clean. Murder is often clumsy, he mused to himself. Unless the murderer wishes it not to be murder, but spectacle. He returned to the ballroom. The rug beneath the body had been shifted, subtly. The furniture, too. Poirot traced the scrape marks and discovered the corner table had been moved half a meter from its usual place. He examined its underside, and there, affixed with wax, was a second playing card. The ace of spades. Death, hidden not in plain sight, but in proximity. A second red herring, a second misdirection. And in that moment, he saw it. The killer was not hiding in the shadows. They were center stage. Georgina Vale, flawless, flawlessly rehearsed. Poirot confronted her in the garden as dawn began to break. "You knew the will had changed," he said. She froze. "You had motive." Gresham was to oversee the estate's handover. He found the forged documents, the ones you created. You feared exposure. So you staged his death like a scene. Gave yourself a part in the play. The damsel, the scream, the glass, the queen. She laughed, a hollow sound. "You have nothing." "I have the letter Gresham sent," Poirot said, producing the envelope. "Addressed to me, left in his briefcase." He knew he would not survive the night, and the final reveal fell like thunder. But there was more. Poirot turned not to Georgina, but to Evelyn. "You knew. You suspected her, but you remained silent. Why?" Evelyn's face was pale. "Because," she said, "she was my sister." Gasps. Poirot nodded. "The true red herring," he whispered, "was not the card. It was the name. Vale was not Georgina's by birth. She changed it after her scandal in Paris. But you knew her, protected her, loved her, and in doing so, you allowed another death. Georgina tried to flee. She did not make it past the gate. The truth, when revealed, stunned the room. Red herring, red hands, and a woman who had worn both like a costume. Poirot stood in the ballroom once more, the sunlight now creeping in through the tall windows. The scent of blood remained faint, but the lies were gone. "Murder," he said quietly, "is rarely hidden in the shadows. It prefers applause." And as the doors closed behind him, the ballroom fell silent again. The spotlight had dimmed, but the truth remained, sharp as ever, waiting for the next act. Chapter 10. The Clock That Lied. The ticking was wrong. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but wrong. It was not just the sound, not just the rhythm, but something deeper. The beat was off, as though the heart of the manor had skipped. Outside, the wind screamed through the moors, rattling the iron gates of Highmore. Inside, the great drawing-room stood silent, save for that single, traitorous tick. Hercule Poirot stood beneath the tall grandfather clock, and frowned, his eyes narrowing, not at the face of time, but at the lie it told. "I swear it struck 10 when I heard the shot," Judith Maple insisted, arms folded tightly across her chest, her voice brittle with certainty. "I heard the chime with my own ears. The clock never lies." "Non, madame," Poirot replied softly. "The clock does not lie. But perhaps someone made it do so. Human nature, Hastings. It seeks control over chaos. And when murder is committed, the very first casualty is time. Always. The killer bends it, hides behind it, relies on it to shield their movements. But time, though fragile, never remains hidden for long." Poirot did not trust the ticking. Lord Alistair Winthrop had been dead for over a week, and yet the inconsistencies in the timeline had persisted like an infection. Witnesses swore to the same hour. Statements aligned too perfectly. Evelyn said she passed the study at 9:50. Clara swore she saw the shadow under the door at 9:55. Colonel March claimed he heard the shot precisely at 10. And the clock, it backed them all up. It had chimed. It had announced the moment. But Poirot had his doubts. The study door had been locked from the inside. The revolver fired once, the body found slumped in the chair, pen in hand, blood still wet. But Poirot, upon entering the room that night, had checked the clock. He always did, and he remembered distinctly it had read 9:38, yet no one else mentioned that time. Why? He stood in the drawing room now, alone, staring at the clock. He turned the minute hand backward, one tick, nothing. Then forward, tick, tock. The mechanism felt loose. Poirot removed the faceplate with the gentlest motion. Inside, behind the brass gears, a tiny thread, red, silk. A wire had been tied to the minute hand's lever. Not sabotage, but manipulation. The time could have been altered, and it had been. The timeline was broken. Act 1. The crime and chaos. An illusion orchestrated through something everyone takes for granted. It was time to revisit each suspect. Not for motive, those had been discussed, but for their relationship to time itself. Evelyn Carrow had always been precise, a secretary by nature and title, obsessed with schedules. Her alibi: she was preparing the accounting reports at her desk until precisely 10:15. "I looked up when the chime sounded," she had said. "It was a little early, I thought, but the storm, perhaps it muffled the minutes." Poirot had noted it. Not the explanation, but the convenience. The chime, the sound, became the scapegoat. Lightning, wind, faulty hearing, all of it protected the lie. But who needed the chime most? Colonel March, perhaps. His story hinged on it. He was in the library when he heard the clock strike 10, and immediately after, the shot. There was no gap, he insisted. The chime rang, and then bang. But Poirot now knew that the shot occurred before the chime, which meant the colonel was not telling the truth or had been fooled. Clara Winthrop's testimony had been the least detailed. "I saw the light under the study door, around 10. Then I heard nothing." The light, Poirot now realized, had already been extinguished by the time the rest of the house believed the murder occurred. So, the killer had already acted, before 10, and then tampered with the clock to create a false timestamp. But why? That answer came not in logic, but in detail. In the lower hall, near the wine cellar, Poirot noticed a strange stain on the stone. Wax. Faint. Dark. The same wax found inside the clock's mechanism. A candle had been used, a match had been struck, and then the flame had been snuffed out. not to light the way, but to heat the wire. The silk. It had caused the gear to slip, resetting the chime's spring. The murder had taken place at 9:35. Someone had adjusted the clock afterward, making it strike late, so everyone would believe the shot had come after 10. A clever trick. Poirot knew now that the manipulation of time was not the work of an amateur. He returned to Clara's room. Her journal, previously dismissed as emotional rambling, contained something new. A passage about time. He always watched the clock, ever since Geneva, as though afraid it would run out before he could fix what he had broken. Geneva. The name returned like a whisper. Alistair's business dealings had brought him to Switzerland nearly a decade ago, and something had happened there. Something involving Colonel March and a financial scandal hushed by quiet payoffs. Poirot made the connection. March had been with Alistair during Geneva. The fallout had cost lives. An entire firm collapsed under mysterious circumstances. March had been cleared, but Alistair had kept evidence. A ledger, a journal. He had told Evelyn of it just days before his death. And so, Poirot returned to the study. Underneath the floorboards, beneath the rug that had been disturbed ever so slightly, he found the journal, burnt at the edges. But the name was visible. M. Roden. March. Bribes. 40,000 francs. Poirot summoned him. "You feared exposure," Poirot said softly. "You feared that Alistair would ruin you with the truth." March's hands clenched. "You killed him before he could sign the journal into legal record. Then you set the clock to chime at 10, to shift suspicion. You needed Evelyn to appear incompetent. Clara to seem disoriented. Everyone's memory would bend around the chime, around time." The colonel said nothing. Poirot stepped forward. "But time, mon colonel, it is the one witness you cannot bribe." The final twist came as March stood to leave. He looked not at Poirot, but at the wall behind him. The portrait of Alistair, his brother-in-law, his oldest friend. "I warned him," March said. "He was going to dig up the past, bury the estate in scandal. I begged him, but he wouldn't stop." Poirot's eyes hardened. "So you stopped him." The arrest was quiet. Poirot returned to the drawing room and reset the grandfather clock. It now chimed correctly, faithfully, a small but solemn apology to the time it had betrayed. He stood in the silence afterward, thinking. The murderer, he whispered, did not just break a life. He broke time, bent it around himself, used it as a weapon. But time, she does not forgive. She waits. And then, as always, she reveals. Outside, the storm had passed. But in the clock's final chime, one could still hear the echo of what it had once hidden and what it could no longer protect. Chapter 11. The final trap is set. The candle extinguished itself. One breathless flicker, and then the flame vanished, casting the entire drawing room into a sudden, suffocating darkness. Outside, the wind rattled the leaded windows like a prisoner clawing at his cell. A single bootstep echoed down the east wing corridor. Then another, deliberate, measured. Poirot did not move. He had been waiting for this exact moment, not for minutes, but for days. And now, finally, the killer had come to finish what they started. Unaware, they were walking straight into his trap. Mon cher, he whispered to himself, it is a curious thing. The guilty, they are not drawn to the scene of the crime. They are summoned by the guilt, yes, but also by pride. It is always pride that returns them to the place where their secrets unravel. The fire hissed softly back to life as the servants stirred it. Poirot gave the faintest nod, then returned his gaze to the doorway. The trap had been set carefully, like a watchmaker setting the teeth of a golden gear. Every tick, every detail, every spoken word of the past week had been laid like threads in a spider's web, and now that web was trembling. For the past 10 days, Highmore Estate had been devoured by confusion. 3 confessions, 4 bodies, a vanished will, and time itself bent to the needs of a cunning hand. But murder, true murder, is never a spontaneous act. It is architecture, constructed, calculated, and at the center of this construction was one final truth. Someone had orchestrated all of it, and Poirot knew who. He only needed them to reveal themselves. Act I had ended with the chaos of the ballroom murder. Gresham's death had momentarily derailed the investigation, but Poirot had understood what others did not. It wasn't a separate crime. It was a seal, a final lock on a carefully buried box of secrets. Act 2 brought the unraveling. He returned first to Evelyn Carrow. She had grown quiet again, resigned, brittle, worn to the edge. "It doesn't make sense anymore," she said, as she poured tea, her hand trembling. "Nothing does." "But the truth, mademoiselle," Poirot replied gently. "She always makes sense when she is ready to be seen." She said nothing, but her silence was filled with fear. Not fear of guilt, but of what Poirot might yet discover. She knew something, had seen something, but he would not press her, not yet. The same could not be said of Clara Winthrop. Her mask had not slipped once. She walked the estate with the icy confidence of someone who had already calculated her inheritance. But it was in the drawing-room, just 3 nights before, that Poirot saw it, the tremor in her eye when Helen's name was mentioned. It was the first crack, and that, he knew, was all he needed. Act 3 began tonight. He summoned them all, just after dinner. Each received the same note. "Please meet me in the drawing-room at 9. There is something you must see." The fire was already lit, the armchairs arranged in a half-circle. Poirot stood by the hearth, hands clasped behind his back. The grandfather clock ticked methodically, its every movement now restored, honest. No more lies from the hours. Evelyn arrived first, followed by Helen, pale, composed, then Clara, then Colonel March, and finally Georgina Vale, hair swept back, eyes sharp, all of them, wearing expressions carefully chosen. But Poirot's eyes, they missed nothing. "I thank you all for coming," he began. "The events that have taken place here at Highmore are not disconnected. No, they are part of a singular scheme, a sequence of acts, each designed to distract, to confuse, and to conceal one person's ultimate objective: control over the estate, over the truth, over life itself." They shifted in their chairs. Poirot continued, "Lord Alistair Winthrop was not a man loved by all. In fact, he was a man feared, resented, used. But he was not a fool. In the final weeks of his life, he began to suspect the web that had been spun around him. And so, he acted, he rewrote his will, he prepared to expose past crimes. He contacted me." Georgina's brow twitched. "So why didn't he tell us?" Poirot smiled slightly. "He did not trust you." Silence. He turned toward the clock. The moment of his death was not at 10 o'clock. It was at 9:35. The chime was manipulated. A string, waxed and heated, used to delay the mechanism. This gave the killer time to create false alibis. Colonel March scowled. "You're implying one of us tampered with it." "Non, Colonel. I am stating it." Poirot's voice cut through the room. But that crime was not the end. It was merely the first layer. The second was the disappearance of the will. The third, the forged documents placing control of the estate into another's hands. And the fourth, the elimination of anyone who came too close to revealing the truth. Including Arthur Gresham, Poirot walked slowly along the line of chairs. Now we come to the trap. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a brooch, blue enamel, delicate, familiar. "I found this in the attic, hidden behind a rafter. You know it, mademoiselle?" he asked Clara. Her face remained still. "It was my mother's." "Indeed, but it was also used as leverage to blackmail Lord Alistair. You sold it, then lied. He discovered the theft. He confronted you." She did not blink. Poirot continued. "But you were not the one who killed him." The room turned. He looked to Georgina. "You arrived days before anyone else. You were not summoned. You were not mourning. You were scouting. And when Gresham discovered the forged documents, your forgeries, you silenced him." Her eyes hardened. "You can't prove any of that." "Non," Poirot said. "Not until tonight." He turned back to the hearth and struck the bell. The door opened. Inspector Levington stepped in, followed by a young man in uniform. Poirot nodded. "This man is from the records office in Bath. He has brought with him a very curious piece of evidence, a registration of a deed filed under a false name. The handwriting matches one of you in this room." Poirot gestured to the table, where a sheet had been placed beneath glass. Georgina took one step back. "You planted that." "I? Non, madame. You did." Poirot walked to the window, his voice now quieter. Each murder, each lie, was wrapped in the illusion of order. Timelines, clocks, alibis. But the truth, it always arrives late. And when it does, it walks straight into the room, thinking it is still in control. Georgina lunged, but it was too late. The constables moved swiftly. She was caught, handcuffed, and then the final twist. As Georgina was escorted out, she turned to Evelyn. "You should have burned the second copy." Poirot's eyes narrowed. He turned to Evelyn slowly. But Evelyn did not run. She did not plead. "I knew," she said. "I knew what she was doing. But I thought, if I let her, if I kept silent, I'd be spared." Poirot nodded. "But you see, mademoiselle, silence is the cousin of complicity. And now, your silence has spoken." The room emptied. Only Poirot remained. He stood before the fire, watching the last flickers fade. "Justice," he whispered, "is not swift. She walks on slow feet. But when she arrives, she leaves nothing untouched." The trap had closed, and the truth, so long hidden in the folds of time and lies, had finally walked straight into the light. Chapter 12. The truth no one wanted to hear. The silence after the verdict was the loudest thing in the room. Not the clink of teacups, or the shifting of chairs, nor the murmurs of disbelief that had followed every arrest. This silence was different. It had weight, a presence. It was the kind of silence that remains even after everyone has left the room, the kind that lingers in the walls, in the floorboards, in the breath you didn't realize you were holding. And in the center of that silence stood Hercule Poirot, unmoving, staring at the fire that burned too clean, too bright, in the hearth of Highmoor's once proud drawing-room. Then came the voice, soft, wavering, barely above a whisper. He deserved it. It was Clara Winthrop, pale, composed, hands trembling just enough to betray the earthquake beneath. Evelyn, seated nearby, turned sharply. Helen flinched. Poirot did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the flames, as if they alone held the final thread of this vast and bitter puzzle. "You will forgive me, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his voice calm, "if I do not take that statement as a legal justification." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she replied. "I'm asking for understanding." There was a pause. "I do not give understanding," Poirot replied. "I give truth. And truth, as we have seen, is rarely what one desires." It had begun, as so many things did in this case, with a misplaced assumption. For weeks, every step of the investigation had followed a straight line, with too many perfect curves. Motives had been clean. Suspects were predictable. Alibis synchronized like clockwork. But the crime, the true crime, had not been born in the moment of the shot. It had been born decades earlier, buried under layers of family obligation, lies, and something far more dangerous than hate: loyalty. Act 1, the crime and chaos, was, on the surface, simple. Lord Alistair Winthrop found dead in his study. A single gunshot. No sign of forced entry. The weapon his own. The door locked. Suspicions pointed outward, toward lovers scorned, brothers returned from exile, secretaries betrayed, fortunes fought over. But the truth did not sit with those who were loud in their guilt. It nestled quietly beside the one who said the least, the one who waited. Poirot's suspicions had begun that very night, not with the crime scene itself, but with what had not been said. Clara had given her account with precision, too precise. She had cried at the right times. She had deferred politely to Evelyn's more dominant grief. She had made herself seem small. But Poirot knew. The people who disappear in a room full of suspects are often the ones who should be seen most clearly. Act 2, clues, red herrings, and suspicions grew increasingly tangled. The forged will, the missing journal, the cellar corpse, the red herring planted in the ballroom, the clock manipulation. All of them had pointed fingers in every direction, but one. Clara, the grieving niece, had no motive, no gain, no visible hatred. She had a future, they said, not a reason to destroy her past. And yet Poirot had noticed the lace handkerchief found in the study drawer, embroidered not with initials, but with a symbol, a small, 5-petaled flower. Not Clara's, not Evelyn's, not Georgina's, but her mother's. A rare signature, something she had seen as a child, a detail no one else would recognize. Poirot had found the match in an old photograph, buried in a broken frame in the attic. Her mother's signature, which meant Clara had been in the study that night, long before she said she had been. More curious was the tea set. Poirot had taken note of the faint scent of lemon on the porcelain. Not unusual, except Alistair despised lemon. Clara, however, always drank it, always had. The faint ring of lipstick on the second cup was not Evelyn's color, nor Georgina's. It matched only Clara's pale coral tint. The tea had not been poured for a guest. It had been shared with someone you trust. Poirot remembered that detail above all others. It led to the final revelation, Act 3. He had asked the constables to delay the full arrest of Georgina Vale until tonight. Let the illusion persist. Let the guilty feel secure. Then invite them all one final time, into the drawing room. There, he laid out the truth. "You see, mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we have chased the murderer through shadows and secrets, through blood and inheritance, through lies and letters. But tonight, I bring you not a theory, but the truth, the one no one wished to believe." He walked to the center of the room. Clara Winthrop murdered her uncle. The silence was immediate, like a glass shattering in the mind. Clara didn't flinch. "He was my uncle," she said flatly. "He raised me." Poirot nodded. He raised you, and he controlled you, in ways that no one else here ever saw. You were obedient, perfect, compliant, but he kept you close, too close." A gasp from Evelyn. "What are you saying?" "I am saying," Poirot replied, "that Alistair Winthrop was not merely a tyrant. He was a man who believed his legacy required more than money. It required a continuation of himself, and he believed Clara should be that legacy." The horror in the room was slow to arrive. It dripped, like blood from a blade, one realization at a time. Poirot stepped closer. "You killed him, not for money, not for vengeance. You killed him because he intended to make you carry a secret for the rest of your life. And when you saw the rewritten will, the one that named his illegitimate daughter Helen as the heir, you realized he had been preparing to discard you entirely." Clara's lips parted, but no words came. Poirot went on. "You lured him to the study, made tea, sat in silence. He gave you the pen, asked you to sign a witness form, not for the will, but for the transfer of power, a symbolic death. And in that moment, you chose the real one. The revolver, already in the drawer, a single shot. And then," Poirot said, "you reset the clock. You manipulated the timeline. You watched as Evelyn confessed, as March panicked, as Georgina forged and lied. You let them, because they were all guilty of something. And guilt, in a house like this, is a mask easy to borrow." Clara stood. Tears formed, but did not fall. "I was 17 when it started," she said. 17. And with that, the truth, the one no one wanted to hear, finally stood naked in the room. There was no applause, no shock, only the creaking of a floorboard and the snap of a flame in the hearth. Poirot bowed his head. Later, as she was led away, Clara asked him quietly, "Do you believe I was wrong?" Poirot looked at her. "I believe you were broken, and I believe he did it." She said nothing more. The constables took her through the front door as the rain began to fall. Poirot remained by the fireplace, alone. The room emptied. The clock chimed softly. Midnight. Honest, undisturbed. He lit a final cigarette, and with a sigh that spoke not of triumph, but of sorrow, he whispered, "Justice, Hastings, is not always noble. Sometimes she is merely necessary." The fire burned lower. The house, for the first time in years, was quiet, and the truth, terrible and true, had finally been heard.